I really hate Malcolm Gladwell. I read that book, Blink, and he says in the book, Blink, that people will judge you and decide whether they like you or don't like you in less than a second when they see you. And that's a terrifying thought to put in the head of somebody who has to get on stage. So what I did was I recorded my whole talk and compressed it using sound technology, thanks, and to less than a second, and then I learned how to say it, and I just did it. I'll do it again. I actually think it's better the second time, because you pick up on some of the subtleties you missed the first time round. And I actually sneaked in a couple of little subliminal messages, for individuals in the audience that'll kick in a little bit later, perhaps. So instant reactions is one way that we judge people. But psychologists try different ways, perhaps more complex ways, of trying to understand our personalities and our characters. And that's what I want to talk about today. One of the ways that psychologists do that is by looking at the drawings that we make. This can be quite tricky to do a meaningful drawing after we've had somebody who had a slide of everything that's ever happened ever earlier on. And then followed up with a slide of rotating charm and happiness. And I'm meant to be the magician. So if I do a simple drawing, it's tricky to really work out much about my personality from that drawing. Oh. If I add a word, then we get a little bit more meaning, a little bit more of a stronger metaphor. A few more details, and you start to maybe see that I'm not necessarily the sportiest of people. And so the more meaning we add to a drawing, the more a psychologist can perhaps make guesses, make understandings about the kind of person we are, and turn that into a kind of reality. Lovely acoustics in this room, isn't it? So I'm an applied magician. What on earth does that mean? For a number of years now, for around 10 years, I've been seeking ways of applying magic to other things, to other areas. Mainly design, looking at how magicians think. Magicians think in quite an interesting way about designing the impossible. When magicians have a meeting and they talk about impossible things, you know, if somebody says something, what if I could do this? A magician will say, that's impossible, brilliant. Because it's actually really hard to come up with new impossible things. We've vanished everything, we've chopped everything in half. A new impossibility is actually quite a wonderful thing. Another field I've been working in is, as was mentioned, is sport and deception. Magicians have thousands of years of practice in controlling the attention of other people. And in sport, that's something that's quite powerful. What I want to talk to you today about, actually, is one specific example. I think I need the clicker. Yep. So I want to talk to you about one specific example of me researching magic history and finding an interesting thing, and then turning that into a piece of research into organizational psychology. So this is Alexander, the man who knows. Alexander was the most popular, most successful magician of his time. He started performing around 1914, 1915. He earned more money than the Beatles in adjusted dollars. He performed all across America, all across Europe. He was married somewhere between 4 and 11 times. We're not entirely sure. He admitted to having murdered 4 men, though it's suspected that he murdered up to 7 in his younger life, which was a quite dangerous life. But the way Alexander differed to other magic shows in the time was that he framed all of his magic around psychology, the strange new art of psychology. And he put down his power, his ability to understand people's personalities, down to psychology. So in some ways, he wasn't just a forerunner of modern mind readers and modern magicians. If he was around today, he'd probably be working in psychometrics and appearing on daytime television. Not as a magician, but as a psychology expert. Now, I was looking at how I might update some of Alexander's performances. And I came across this interesting quote. What Alexander had, through lots of different techniques, was the ability to make it appear that he understood your personality. And he actually said, organizations have personalities too. So he kind of did personality readings, not just on people, but on organizations. This made me think about a famous experiment, the Fora experiment. Some of you may have heard of this. Fora was a psychologist, and in 1948, he asked his students to fill out personality questionnaires. They filled out the questionnaires, handed them in, and he gave them personality readings. And he asked them to measure how accurate those readings were. And he got an average score of around 85% accuracy. What he didn't tell them was that they all were given exactly the same personality reading, and those readings were composed of 12 statements that he'd taken from horoscopes from the daily newspapers. Right? Now, I've always thought that this was a brilliant trick. And I'm interested in how sometimes research in different fields actually takes the form of a trick. And I wanted to update Fora's research with that question from Alexander in mind. Organizations have personalities. So can we trick organizations into thinking that we understand their personalities? So what I did was I contacted 3 different universities in America and Europe who had links with lots of different organizations, and we constructed a questionnaire. We sent this questionnaire to over 1,000 organizations, small ones, big ones, commercial organizations, NGOs, and we asked them to take part in an experiment to measure their personality of their company, the personality of their organization. And we did that by rewriting Fora's original statements. I'm not going to go through all 12 of them. I'm just going to show you a few of these statements and how we went about rewriting them, just so you can see that sometimes that was quite a fiddly job. So one of Fora's most famous statements is, "You have a great need for people to like and admire you." That's my dad, by the way. He came second in this hot pants competition. The guy over there with the moustache came first. My dad was gutted, never got over it. So of course that's a statement that works for individuals, for people. How do you rewrite that to work for organizations? And what we used was, your company has a great need to develop positive brand awareness. Some of the statements didn't really need rewriting. You have a great deal of untapped potential which you have not turned to your advantage. That actually works just as well for individuals as it does for organizations. Everybody thinks that's true about themselves, and crucially, they don't think that other people think that of themselves. All organizations think this is true, and they don't think that other organizations think that's true. Sometimes sentences go hand in hand with each other. Some of the organization's aspirations are unrealistic. So that you can see how that goes hand in hand with untapped potential but an unrealistic aspiration. Thanks to costumefail.com for giving me the use of that image, by the way. This sentence I show you because it was judged the most accurate by all of the organizations. The company appears to be disciplined and well organized from the outside, but the internal workings are often worrisome and messy. So this is sometimes called the duck metaphor. You know, a duck seems very, very calm on the top, but is paddling like hell underneath. if I ever come across an organisation or a company that doesn't think this is true about themselves, then I think there's something wrong with the company, actually. But strangely, nobody thinks that it's true about other people. This was the hardest one to rewrite. Your sexual adjustment has caused some problems for you. Having to rewrite that for organisations rather than individuals, what I came up with was forming business partnerships has presented some problems. So were we successful? Did we manage to con those organisations? Were they as gullible as individuals when we sent them these individual readings? And yeah, of course they were. And we had feedback from 673 of the organisations actually gave us a measurement of how accurate they thought it was, and we came out around the same as Fora, around 84% accurate. Lots of interesting information inside that, which of the statements they thought were more accurate, etc. But just for today, what I want to end with is actually a statement about what this means, because I think it's kind of sad that Fora's original paper was about gullibility. And he focused on the trick, the fact that people kind of fell for it. And I think that's, as a magician, I think that's a bit sad, to focus on the trick. Magicians try not to focus on the trick, but to focus on the meaning behind the trick. What do these statements actually mean? Why is it that so many people and so many organisations think that these statements are very true about themselves and yet fail to understand that everybody else feels that way? So I think this is actually an experiment not in gullibility, but in vulnerability. The thing that all of these statements have in common is that they express a kind of secret vulnerability that we all feel and yet somehow think other people don't feel. And it's my hope that we understand that better. I think it ties in with that idea of an empathic civilization, to understand that everybody feels vulnerable, organisations feel vulnerable, and then we'll all be a lot nicer to each other. Thank you.